for that warm introduction, Ann. I really appreciate it. Can everybody hear me well? Can you give me a thumbs up that I'm not distorted? I don't have any echoes or there's no axe murderer behind me. Just want to make sure. Okay. Well, two things that just kind of popped into my head as you were talking, and one, I need to shorten up that bio because that felt really weird. Just reading, I thought it was way shorter than that. And secondly, I forget my conversation. I want to learn how to make risotto. I mean, that sounds like the better professional development in time to and utilization of our time. Please send me an invite. I'm not sure if I can sort of be a uh, an add-on to the group, but I can sit on the wall like a fly and be quiet. Uh, I'm certainly not as skilled in the kitchen as I would like to be, but really excited to have a conversation with you all. And I say a conversation, I feel like I'm talking to you, but I really want at the end for us to have, and I'll leave space for us to really have a dialogue about the information that I like to share about the work that we're doing, and I'll share a PowerPoint and kind of speak to that. But it's when I first start out having these conversations, when people hear my background and they say, well, you're at the Chamber of Commerce, but your background is in community development. You work with nonprofit agencies, supporting the community, supporting our young people. My professional career started within juvenile justice. And it's interesting because that's exactly the qualities that our city and our county leaders were looking for in relationship to evolving this construct of how we create what we're now calling inclusive prosperity. And I'll kind of talk a little bit about what that means. And I just put a bunch of initials, and you all know what initials and nomenclatures and how people tend to talk that lingo. But I want to give you what the initials are, but to talk a little bit more about what does it really mean. So EED is equitable economic development, and DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusivity. And I'll sort of tell the story of both sets and how both of those sets of initials really merge into this construct of full participation in our economy, full participation to be successful, especially when we look at our historically underutilized, under-resourced, under-networked, and most marginalized community members. So really, and to be honest with you, I tend not to, I don't want to take any credit for this conversation of where we are today, because the conversation of inclusive prosperity started maybe 2 years before my position was even created. And when we look at equitable economic development, and I'm again being a chamber member, a chamber employee, chamber staff, but under the chamber there are several entities that make up the Raleigh Chamber. One of those entities is Wake County Economic Development. And Wake County Economic Development role is about supporting business and industry growth, recruiting and retaining our existing industries. How do we increase talent? How do we build strong pipelines? And the community and our county commissioners, our mayors wanted to, recognizing that our community was slowly becoming seen as an incredible magnet for industries. We've been ranked in the top 5 of rising metros for over the last 7 years. We have an amazing pipeline of talent. We have 6 colleges within Raleigh alone, 2 historically Black colleges and universities. We have a lot of amazing assets that make our community extremely desirable for outside markets. And so one of the first things, recognizing that we are an incredible magnet, we wanted to understand and truly get down to why do we still see disparities within our most marginalized communities? And is it truly inclusive? Is there truly an opportunity for everybody to climb that ladder of success? And we recognized that albeit we are a great magnet, and this region is an incredible magnet for industries and for the best and the brightest in regards to talent, we are a poor ladder. So ultimately, when we talk about ladder, we're talking about upward mobility. So the question becomes, how can you move from the bottom of the ladder to the top of the ladder? What are the variabilities? What are the components necessary to help our community, our families, our residents move up that ladder? And this report actually came out of a study out of Harvard with Dr. Raj Chetty, who really dug deep into understanding the dynamics of where you are born. And I'll say this, and I think, intuitively, a lot of us truly understand this. Based on where you live can truly define how far up that ladder you can go. How many of you all would agree with that statement? Based on where you live, it can truly define how high you can go up that ladder. And his study really focused in on, depending on your zip code, based on your zip code, these are the percentage chances of you moving from the bottom 20% to the top 20% in terms of economic prosperity. What is your probability of moving from the bottom 20% to the top 20%? Now, the American dream says if you work hard and you invest the type of sweat equity into education, getting prepared, then you should be able to move up that ladder. But the question is really more about where you're born. Is that ladder, are those rungs further apart? Let's understand the components of economic mobility. Are there distractors in those ladders? Is there true accessibility? Are there enough job growth and spaces that we can make sure people can move from a dead-end job to a job that creates sustainable wealth? And we ranked, and as you can see, the densest part of this gradient shows that it is tougher, or rather that ladder of upward mobility is worse in the southeastern parts of our country than anywhere else. Now, we have to also note that, and it's not shared here, but the 51% of our country's poverty is in the Southeast. So we can talk about the correlations that are there as well. And so there was a lot of different variables that went into Dr. Raj Chetty's study. And what I can do after we sort of move into the presentation and start asking questions, I can send you the link to that study because it's really fascinating. And the work that they're doing really kind of gets at why is it so tough to go from the bottom 20% to the top 20%. So that's important to know. So that became sort of a backdrop for our work. So we created this, and I started at the chamber in this role maybe 2.5 years ago. And we decided, and this was the first of its kind within the country, that a chamber and traditional economic development shop was looking at equity in relationship to how we grow. So we created this vision statement that we recognized that increasing the equity meant we wanted to look at the distribution of income, wealth building, employment, and entrepreneurial opportunities for our most vulnerable populations. That means we had to truly understand the makeup of our communities to be able to pull together strategies to ensure that equity can be made. Now, I have to ask a question really quick, and I'll ask for you to participate in the chat box really quick. So what is equity? So equity for us, and we had to do a lot of education awareness about what equity means in relationship to equitable economic development. And one of the things I had to do was to disarm the construct. So let me ask you this, I am a fan of NC State, right? I mean, I am a proud alum. It is the most magnificent school on the planet. Nobody could tell me any different. Nobody could tell me any different. So what could I do? I do recognize that we have not had a basketball championship in about 36 years, okay? Since the Cardiac Pact, I recognize that, okay? Now, what do we need to do? What do we need to do to get to that place of a championship? To have a championship basketball team, put in the chat right now. What does NC State need to do? I'm going to give you an opportunity to be the athletic director, to give NC State some examples. What do you think we need to do? What type of strategies that we need to employ? What are we doing? What is Carolina and Duke doing that we're not doing? Just put your responses in. Don't be afraid to hurt my feelings. Um, I'm an NC State fan, so I am quite comfortable with it. What do we have here? Okay, Sherry, thank you for that. Score more points than your opponents. Okay, that was a little cold-blooded, but okay, that would be the objective of the game. Yes, thank you, Sherry. Recruit top high school recruits. I love that. Absolutely. I see pipeline of good talent. Thank you so much, Nanette. Recruiting top talent, Amy. Consistent and strong coaching, Nanette. You have a lot of strategies here, Nanette. I appreciate that. You are really going in here. Support and training for recruits you get. I love that. That means really building from within. Looking broadly for talent. We need to go further past Winston-Salem. Yes, I totally agree. Spend more money. Spend more money. Beth, where are you? I need to find you up here so I can. Oh, there you are, Beth. Beth, I can neither confirm nor deny that strategy at NC State, but we know it happens in other universities. I will not say any names, but that is I like that. Support the coaching staff, coaching, very targeted recruitment, fill the gaps. These are all great strategies, and these are all great points. Now, let me ask you this. Yes or no? How much, and you can tell me your answer in the chat, how much of responsibility is it for Duke and Carolina to make sure NC State is successful? Are they responsible, yes, or are they not responsible for NC State success? Yes or no? I mean, Duke has All-Americans every single year. I mean, can't they just spare us one? Can't they just give us their all-star McDonald's? Everyone says no. Ann says yes and no. That there's a little conflict going on with you there, Ann. Nope. No. Yeah, absolutely. Nanette, yes, you're just going to be a wave starter. Where's Nanette at? I got to find Nanette on my screen just so I know who is throwing out all the good stuff here. Okay. So it's interesting because it really is not anybody's responsibility. But recognizing that our economic ecosystem is so interdependent when we talk about equity, recognizing that we are building an ecosystem in which if there's truly full participation, everybody wins. So everybody needs to be supportive in doing what we call removing barriers or building bridges to ensure that there's inclusive prosperity. And that literally is all that it gets down to. Now, it's tough to sometimes think at it from the business community because from within the business community is we're sort of dialed in to be extremely competitive and to be focused in and become silos. But we're seeing companies stretch those early on notions, those early corporate notions, those early notions of not investing into the community. We're seeing it. It certainly did not start with the creation of this position, but we wanted to create it where it was normalized. So for us, we also had to understand when we talk about our most vulnerable communities, and I'm a research methodologist by heart, by trade, and a lot of my work was wrought within the data. And so we had to understand the data points. And so what we did, we created a vulnerability scale that this scale and index helped identify the communities that were more vulnerable than others. And we used these 5 data sets. We looked at poverty rate, unemployment, vacant housing, education, and also dependency ratio. And dependency ratio is those that are under 18, over 65. And what we found is, if you look at this map, the areas that are red and orange, they are the most vulnerable census tracts in our county. And this data is from 2011 to 2015. We will be updating this in another year. So we're looking at 4 years worth of data, and you're looking at communities that are in the green. We're saying they are least vulnerable. Now, you do see some of the census tracts in the Northwest that are orange and some that may be red, but the densest set of tracts are predominantly in the Southeast, sort of our southeastern crescent. So recognizing that, that became more of our targeted interventions, if you will. Where are we going to provide the most of the barrier removal, looking at policies, looking at practices, making sure that we can accelerate programmings to help support existing industries or building wealth in these communities through recruiting businesses to move or incentivizing them to come into some of these communities to become transformational. And, you know, it's interesting because when you have a community in a region like ours that is growing, you know, we've seen cautionary tales from other metros that are experiencing, you know, true systemic challenges because there wasn't really responsible growing when they talked about the disparities of residents that could not participate fully. So Seattle is a great example. And I'll just say, you know, when we did an inner city visit to Seattle, we found tent cities where you had folks that, you know, lived in the city during the week, but moved, but went home. Went home and their home was 3 hours away from Seattle because they couldn't afford to live in the community that they worked in. And I mean, I'm talking about people that were living in tent cities that were gainfully employed, making, you know, 50, 60, $70,000 a year, but still could not afford to live in those communities. And so when you talk about that rapid growth, and I'm not going to say the company's name, but I think we all know, you know, when we talk about rapid growth and the systems are in place to help support, whether it be affordable housing, transportation, making sure that we have infrastructures in place for talent pipeline and workforce development, you know, and then also helping to support and build our entrepreneurial and small business sectors. All those pieces play into an equitable economic development system. So for us, once we understood those tracks and we understood the data, we went on a listening tour. And for us, the listening tour is one of the most essential pieces of community development. It's about understanding what's already in places. What are the strengths of our communities? What are the nonprofits? What are the entities that are doing this work? We did a economic mobility asset map where we were able to identify. The research tells us that there are 13 components for true economic mobility in a community. And so we wanted to identify out of those 13 elements, what do we actually have access to within our county? And we found over 270 something artifacts. 270 some are odd, whether it be or nonprofits, whether it be public made accessible programs, whatever it was, whether it be childcare, transportation, affordable housing, job training, all of those different elements, support for small businesses, all of those different elements to ensure that there's true economic mobility. But the scary part of it was not necessarily that we had them. The question became, where were they? Accessibility. And so what we started to see that we had gaps of the accessible elements for economic mobility in the communities that were red and orange. So this data, this information is going to help our decision makers look at, you know, the type of programming that we need or the type of services and supports that we need, and where do we invest those resources. Again, recognizing that equity is either creating a bridge, building a bridge, or removing a barrier for inclusive prosperity, which would invariably help our entire region. So moving forward, for us, you know, we decided the first year going into our second year to really dig deep into these three areas. And I sort of spoke about it already. Looking at small business and entrepreneurship support, really targeting our underserved and under-resourced communities, doing a lot of work around people-based solutions, around talent and workforce development, creating stronger infrastructures within our HBCUs, connecting with our existing industries, and also looking at inclusive economic mobility. And again, that really looked at identifying and galvanizing and understanding the gaps that are in place within our community to once again build that ladder of upward mobility. So with the work of our equitable economic development work, and again, that's really ecosystem building, and it's outside of just our business community. we also saw a need to help support our pipelines going into our existing industries to ensure that our existing industries have are places that are accepting of diversity, that are certainly equitable and also inclusive. And when we talk about, we created this alliance, which vision is about accelerating, and us wanting to be the leading region that's the most diverse, equitable, and inclusive business environment in the country. And we started this alliance out probably March of 2019. And to be honest, the story started with us pulling together, again, looking at workforce development and talent development and understanding some of the challenges of our existing industries. As we talked about equitable economic development, they talked about pipelines of diverse workforces into the businesses, and then also looking at our diversity in relationship to people being able to grow professionally. And so once we identified pain points and we had great conversations, I literally pulled together myself and one of my VPs. We went to LinkedIn and we just Googled DNI, diversity and inclusion, Raleigh Durham, and we found about 20, 25 people. We invited them to a conversation and to talk about those pain points. And those 20, 25 people said, hey, let's bring more people together to have a deeper conversation. And so we thought one day, we said, you know what, back in 2018, we said, let's send out our RSVP, invite people to come. We were expecting maybe 75, 100 people. I mean, we only bought some Jimmy John's, we were anticipating a real small occurrence, and that was our budget, just to have, some cold cuts and some potato chips. And we ended up over 1 week having 400 people actually register for this event. And one, that told us that Jimmy John's wasn't going to cut it. Two, it told us that there was truly an appetite around this conversation. And, a lot of companies were in this space of getting into the work, but wanting to figure out, how can we be supportive to recreate this narrative that companies and even our economic development team have been dealing with in relationship to not only our region, but the narrative of our state. And let me tell you, the narrative that has been pervasive and a narrative that we have been continually hearing about, even to this day, is when you have new people coming into our market, they ask us questions about HB2. They're asking about the bathroom bill. They're asking questions about our inclusiveness. Are you truly, is your community truly homophobic? Are you welcoming? Are you opening? Are you open to diverse? And it's one of those things where we like, yes, we are, but we understood the narrative that was created, and also we have to be completely in tune with our history, recognizing that the long-standing history of Black and brown employees in relationship to just being in the South. So, there are these narratives out there that, you have well-intentioned companies that are trying to figure out, how do we create a more diverse workforce? How do we create a more welcoming culture? And Verna Myers, a thought leader in this space, she talked about diversity as being asked or being invited to the party. Have y'all heard this one before? Diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. And, what we decided to do, recognizing that that isn't truly indeed the truth, we wanted to add the E. Again, the equity piece is not just about being invited to the party or being asked to dance. The question for me was, how do people get to the dance to begin with? How do they get to the party to begin with, to even be asked to dance? So the equity part, we created that piece, and we started looking at programming to help support all of our communities. And for us, we wanted to look at two big buckets. One was our existing industry support, and how do we support our existing industries? And then the second part of the alliance is how do we support underrepresented, undernetworked, and our most marginalized business communities? And, this work has been one of reimagining how we create accessibility. It's been helping us really expand out the conversation of diversity, not just ethnic, not just gender, not just on sexual orientation, but also looking at ableism, also looking at neurodiversity. It has really expanded our minds and our thought process and truly what does it mean to be a truly welcoming environment and a culture. And to be honest with you, when we started that first conversation in which we were planning for 400 people to attend, that ended up being our first conference. But we recognized that, and I'm a, community development, I recognize adult learning tactics and theories. We tend to only retain about 19% of any training. I know I do, probably less. And we wanted to make sure that we were creating a learning community. So the Alliance work really, I think, from my perspective and our goal of our steering committee was for the Alliance to provide opportunities in between the conferences. And our conferences will really be our bookends or our agenda setters. But we would have work groups and opportunities to educate and create awareness and to build programs. All of that work will be happening in between those conferences. And so we've been able to offer not only our conference, but DEI roundtables, which are for our practitioners, our companies that have D&I leads within their community, within their company already, or someone who has been identified, if there isn't a chief diversity officer, but someone that has been identified to work on the policies or to work on the practices. We've had courageous conversations, which, these conversations are really about pushing the envelope. It's about becoming comfortable, being uncomfortable. And I know that's sort of an overused line these days. We just had our most recent courageous conversation yesterday, which we had one of the co-founders for Black Lives Matter, Opal Tometi. She came and spoke about corporate activism and civic engagement and how that can create a competitive edge. And so that was an incredible conversation. We talked about bias within artificial intelligence, recognizing that bias sometimes unintentionally is written into the algorithms because humans write those algorithms. And so even though we hope that artificial intelligence removes subjectivity, but it still has an element that's humanized because it's created by people. Other things that we've done for our historically underserved communities, we do Black and Hispanic Business Momentum programs. We have a pathway program that supports our small businesses and providing them intensive networking opportunities, creating accessibility and support to our major industries, especially when we talk about supplier diversity. And We Connect is simply a way to be able to accelerate through social networking with the uniqueness and the diversity of our community at large. And those programs have been by and large well received. But I will say, and I'm going to stop sharing at this point, the thing that's interesting to me, and I want to at this point kind of open it up to questions, and I'm not sure, Ann, how you want to moderate this. Well, let me ask this question. With all that I've just shared, from a scale from 1 to 10, okay? 10 being you believe that all of this work has been well received by the community at large, or 1, it has not been well received. Because this is a new way of thinking. It's tough work. It calls for a lot of accountability. It calls for a lot of reflection, both individually and also infrastructure. Just put in the chat from 1 to 10, 1 being that I don't think this would be well received, or 10, do you think that our community, and this is based on your own lived experience, what you've experienced, what you've seen. Do you think that this community is ready for this level of evolution? Scale from 1 to 10, just put it in the chat. 1, really not ready, not well received. 10, extremely ready and poised. I love this. 6, 5, 7. Somebody played it safe with the 5, 7, 8. Sadly, 5 or 6, 7, 5. 1 or 10, depends. Sherry, there you go, being thought provoking. 6, depends on where you live and how safe you feel. I love that perspective. It depends on who you are and the subject. This is a very subjective question. I don't know that our broad community is aware well of this, so it's tough to assign a number. Great. Appreciate that, Nanette. Oh, Debbie, I see a lot of window dressing. Okay. Now we're talking about performative allyship. We're talking about things being just shown, and is it truly deep and penetrating? Absolutely. We could talk about that a little bit too. Well, let me put my number in. I know you are really waiting. All right. Doesn't matter because we're going to evolve anyway. We have leaders, we have community folk, we have invested organizers that have, oh wow, I didn't even realize I sent this privately to somebody. I didn't even give you all my answer. Oh, it was so profound. Okay, can you see it now? All right. So we have folks in our community that are well poised and they truly believe that we are going to be on the right side of history with this work. And recognizing that regardless of the detractors, regardless of how painful it's going to be, regardless of us being truly uncomfortable and having to really check our own biases, have to check sort of the old way of doing things. We have a set of community leaders and people that are really excited about moving. The challenge is, to be honest with you, is to be paralyzed in analyzing the problem to the point where we don't want anybody to be scared to make a move for fear of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. And we have to give each other grace. And I want to leave with giving everyone in this room a space to be. It's okay to be wrong. It's okay, to mess up. My football coach told me all the time, listen, if you get tackled, just fall forward. You're going to get tackled. You're not going to get a touchdown every single time, but just fall forward because at least you're 1 inch closer to the goal line than you were before. And we had an incredible, courageous conversation with the CEO of Ben and Jerry's, Matthew McCarthy, and Ben and Jerry's, is sort of now synonymous to social justice. If you think of any brand out there, it kind of blows my mind that the ice cream people are really knocking it out the park in relationship to social justice and civic engagement. Think about it. Their product literally is not good for us. Like, their product is literally, as you eat it, you are just adding stuff that shouldn't be in your body. But I love the fact that they are using their platform to move towards a better humanity, and to a better world. And Matthew said that if you wait to become an expert in this work, if you wait to become an expert in race, if you wait to become an expert in equity, then you're going to miss the opportunity. You're going to miss the moment. You truly are. So I will leave it at that. I will stop preaching. I'll get off my soapbox. I am here to answer your questions, to engage you. And I truly do appreciate you, what you all are doing in your convenings. And I love to be here to support you. Any questions?
How do you see the rapid gentrification that's happening in those census tracts? Gentrification.
I heard someone ask about gentrification. It was very faint.
Yes.
I'm sorry?
I was going to type it. How do you
address the rapid gentrification in the census tracts?
How do you address the rapid gentrification in those census tracts?
Yeah, and that, to be honest with you, outside of the strategies that we're employing, like land banking, and making sure that the existing tenants and the existing landowners, they truly understand, sort of the power and the purchasing power of their land. There's a lot of education and awareness that has to go on, but at the same time, we're also trying to talk about the community, creating sort of a community benefits agreement with companies that are expanding into some of these communities. So that what you're not doing is, because development is development, but what we don't want is displacement. And so when we talk about the growth of our community, we have to make sure that our most marginalized they are not the ones being the most impacted in regards to, an apartment complex deciding to, double their rent because a Starbucks just moved next door or a Publix moved next door. So we have to look at what are the strategies and policies that we're doing to help mitigate the debris of development. We want to develop and grow smartly. Now, it's also interesting because we've even had conversations with developers and with companies about how are you employing, once again, saying you can be transformative in a community that you're developing in. So what are the community needs as you are coming into that community that we can create bridges for that workforce, whether it be in job skills training, whether it be into how can we support affordable housing, how can we support entrepreneurial support. It's about not only just taking from that community, but how can you give back in a meaningful way. So you're seeing now where, and I'm excited about it because, my role within our economic development shop, as much as it is external work, it's just as much internal work going on in which I'm talking to our business development and recruitment team. I'm talking to the investors. I'm talking to the companies that are looking to actually make investments in the communities. And so it's one of those things where there's not one silver bullet, but we cannot forget our most marginalized. And please understand that their voices are at the table. There certainly are, as in any conversation that we're having. Does that provide a reasonable answer?
Yeah, thanks, Danya. So we have another question. Can you share some of the wins from these programs?
Oh, absolutely. One of the biggest wins is that we were able, to pass, and this is getting into my nerdy policy side, we were able to pass an incentive tier that helped to incentivize companies that were going to go into those vulnerable census tracts, and they were going to actually expand with a certain, with the goal of our county. They would expand with an investment of over $2 million. And they are also going to ensure that every job is at county minimum wage. So, we were looking at making sure that as companies expand that and again, the county moved up to put its money where its mouth is, in terms of making sure that all county employees were at $15 an hour. And those sort of decisions, we wanted to make sure if we're asking companies to do the same, that our public space was also willing to do the same. So that was a huge win. Another win that is hard to quantify was our creating an inclusive culture, an inclusive business culture where our Black and brown entrepreneurs truly feel connected to our local chambers. And one of the first things we actually had at one point, 18% membership for our Black and brown members at the Raleigh Chamber. And so when you look at that number, a lot of folks will say, well, it's low because our population size is low within our Black and brown communities. And that wasn't the case. When we did our listening tour and we started talking to Black and brown businesses, it was as simple as when I come to events, when I do not feel connected. And when I network within a very homogeneous groups. And so what we wanted to do is make sure that we created this inclusive and welcoming environment. That's why we threw out Black Business Momentum. That's why we created Black Entrepreneurship Week. We did a full week of entrepreneurship programs for Black businesses. And we had over 2,500 entrepreneurs come through our chamber. And literally we had people that had been at the chamber for over 20 years who had never seen that number of entrepreneurs ever. They had never seen that. And so it's something where, to me, we are changing and we are reimagining and rewriting the history of connectivity within our business community. And again, it's hard to quantify, but now you're starting to see where our markets that we are in competition with, whether it be San Antonio, Austin, San Diego, we are starting to get the questions of, and people are talking about our inclusion. People are talking about what's going on within our community and that this is number one priority for us. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, Danya. So we have one. You mentioned that the vulnerability data reflects 4 years ending 2015. or 16. With the efforts put forth since then, do you anticipate that the next set of data will show improvements in our area? Obviously, lots of work to do, but are we seeing a positive trend?
I love the word trend. I definitely think we're trending up. And the interesting thing about it that I think in forecasting what our next set of 4 years are going to look like, I anticipate it to be a little bit better. But what I wanted to do was also look what was going on 4 years prior. And so when we pulled that data, it's interesting because, and even we actually went 8 years back. We wanted to see the communities that you can say is more a deep, ingrained, it's almost institutionalized poverty versus the whims of the stock market. So in other words, when the recession happened in 2008, some of the communities that you saw were green, they were actually red and orange, but it was only for short periods of time. You only saw it, from 2004, 2008, and then it went back to green. Now, what areas do you think has been red for decades? It didn't matter what point of the year, 2004, 2000, 1998, 1994, what parts of the community do you think have been perpetually red? Southeast Raleigh, parts of Knightdale. And so it's interesting because we have to also take into account population shifts and the movement of populations. So we're actually starting to see, and this goes back to the conversation about gentrification and affordable and workforce housing, we're starting to see our most vulnerable communities actually moving east. And so our challenge and this is a larger county and city conversation, is how are we preparing to help support this really deep, sustained creation of a permanent underclass? And that's only the best way that I can explain it. So in other words, when we have industries, we tend to target 4 main industries in economic development. We target IT, life sciences, clean tech, and advanced manufacturing. And a lot of these industries, you're really attracting jobs that require a 4-year degree, and you can average make up over 100K. And we need to start looking at, and in research, we sort of categorize jobs in 3 main sort of buckets. You have good jobs, and those good jobs are typically those career jobs, those jobs that require a 4-year degree, and you can go on, you can raise your kids, and you can have a savings. Then we have a middle called promising jobs. Now, promising jobs can lead you to a good job. They're promising. There's a lot of potential to go to good jobs. But then there's a huge category called other. And what we've designated other jobs those are what some would call your dead-end jobs. In some respects, your service industry jobs. And so when we talk about people typically starting in your other job category to move to promising and then to move to good, that is tougher to do if there aren't enough promising jobs. It's hard as heck to go from others to good, but we have to do more in being strategic and looking for, and you may have heard this nuance, the missing middle class. Those jobs in which that you can get out of high school, you can go right into that career, and you could buy a house, which you start building equity and own wealth creation, and you can have kids, and you are set with retirement and your savings. Those jobs are few and far between. And so we are starting to look at not only identifying industries that we need to target to help us build back that middle class, but also looking at those type of jobs. How can we build stronger pathways from promising to good to make sure, because again, it's nothing wrong with the service industry, but the question is, are you permanently there for life? And there's no moving up. There's the rungs of that economic mobility ladder are too far apart for people to be able to climb. And then how much does it take in terms of resources from the public sector to make those ladders rungs a little bit closer together? So it's, when do we want to start the work? Do we want to do it on the front end, or do we want to do it on the back end? Some people call that welfare. Well, we don't want this to be about social services, social programming. That's not what we're talking about. It's about building a strong and robust economic ecosystem that everybody can participate from day one. I hope that answered your question, Ann.
No, thank you, Danya. So I have a last question. So in this environment with George Floyd and others, how have you as a Black male, and in the environment that we're in with the defund police and the other things going on, how does that impact you individually, but also the work that you're doing now with the economic?
That's a tough question, and I say it's tough because it's a little exhausting, personally. I know you can't tell I'm a Black male, and I raised two beautiful Black boys. One just turned 15 yesterday, my son, and my nephew, who is 16. And I recognize that the conversations that I have with both of my boys is conversations of how to navigate a world being as least intimidating as you can be. To have your kids ask you questions about why can't I play with my Nerf guns when they were 5, 6 years old outside, or, why did somebody take their kids, leave their kids, took their kids from the pool when we got there? Or, my nephew who was an amazing swimmer, had an incident and he was a champion swimmer, and I say was, when he was getting out of the pool after beating everybody in this competition. And this kid was a fish. I mean, he's an incredible swimmer. And as he was walking back into the locker room to change, an adult walked by him out of the locker room and said, "Drown, nigger." And it took that fire that he had. No matter what we could say about, that was just one person. That was just he never wanted to get in that pool. And so, personally, and we've known each other for years, and I've been a youth advocate and a community advocate, and I feel like I'm built for this work. And no matter what research and what practices and theories and community building that you're doing, and I do feel like the will is there. We're creating this incredible community, private, public coalition of companies and our public leaders to create a better way to dismantle systemic racism. Like, you're going to hear a lot about that in the coming month, and to do a disparity study to really help this inclusive, like, to really understand the mechanics of systemic racism. And the people are there to want to do the work. And I'm there for the building of this infrastructurally. But I don't know how I'm faring as a father and an uncle of two Black boys, who I still have to tell them, you don't wear your hood out at night because you let people see your face.
Yeah. I appreciate you being real with us. And as you see, the majority of us in this organization are white females, and we have that white privilege, and we haven't lived that. And, we are trying to understand, and your discussion today, I hope, has opened some doors for us, but also we want to be part of the solution. And it's, it's a big elephant, and so we've just got to start taking those bites. But what you presented has been fascinating, because as we were talking yesterday with Ann Laster and I, the community is stirred, and we have some appetite for this, but we also know that it's opening up some very deep and hard wounds, and these conversations are really hard. So we really appreciate you taking the time today to open up your heart with us. So thank you, Danya. We really appreciate it.
Well, it's my pleasure. And, we hope, I always tell people, when you have that feeling that you want to, like, you feel helpless, like you can't do something, that's where you really want to resist that feeling. Push that as far back into the corner as possible, because just one conversation, becoming more fluent in the space of race equity, the conversations that we have with family members, one of the hardest conversations that I have every single time I feel like there's more quality time with my boys is the barbershop. And that is probably, for me, in my circles, probably the most homophobic place that I can go to, that I frequent. And I'm having to have conversations about what it is to be, homosexual. And it's not as horrible. It's not this whole negative narrative that you hear at the barbershop, because you have this male toxic masculinity that's going on. And, I have my boys listening to this every day, and I can't wait until I leave the barbershop. I have to address it right then. I have to talk to my barber about his notions. I have to say, no, that's not right. I have to stand up right there, and then I have to sit in his chair and let him give me a haircut, right? And that's very awkward. I've known this man for 20 some odd years, but I'll have a one-off conversation with him and say, listen, and I told him this when my son was 6 years old, 6 and 7. I said, I don't want my boys, this is not a belief system that I teach my boys. And if I have to make a decision on bringing my kids to this barbershop and being committed to you, I commit to my kids. I can leave this barbershop and find another barber. But I also understood that if I left, would the conversation continue on? So it's sort of one of those weird places of, do you just unfriend people on Facebook because you don't like what they're saying? Or do you challenge them? Do you look at it with an authentic conversation of growth? And is that an opportunity to grow? And also your people to see you engage in that conversation, your kids to see you push back. And so that's, I would say, you have agency to make a change in your own circles. And I would say, please go forth and do that.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is there anything, because we represent a lot of different organizations and companies, is there anything you ask that we could do today?
Yeah, that to me, it would be get into some really strong books that are out there. There's one on with Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. He has out talking about how to become an anti-racist. There's this book by Robin DiAngelo on white fragility. I love Ta-Nehisi Coates because he gives a really personal perspective of his life and relationship to race. It's called Between the World and Me. What I can do, and there's also some really great podcasts. There's a great podcast that I listen to almost every day. It's called Code Switch on NPR. But what I'm going to do, I actually have a list on our website, the Triangle DEI website, and it's a list of resources. It's a list of books. It's a list of, and also, what I've loved is, and I haven't been a huge social media person, to be honest with you. I still have MySpace. I'm just being honest. But I love getting on Instagram and just following some of the entities, some of the organizations that are doing the work. So sort of like the ACLU or Color of Change or Black Lives Matters or NAACP. There are a lot of organizations that are sharing articles, showing their work. And a lot of times it's about challenging the sources of information that you get and going outside of those circles to get different perspectives and to hear a narrative differently. And so I included the website to the Triangle DEI Alliance. So you can, and it's a direct link to some of the resources on anti-racist work. And if there's anybody who's interested in learning more about the Alliance or how your company can support and be a part of the work, please email me. Let me know if there's anything that we can do for you. I'm putting my email address in the link right now. And I really appreciate everybody being a part of this conversation.